used to think love meant sacrifice. That bending, compromising, and giving up small pieces of myself was just part of being a good wife. But looking back now, I see the truth. It wasn't love. It was control disguised as care. Possessiveness masquerading as passion. And he, David, had built our entire marriage on that lie. It didn't start in obvious ways. There were no slaps, no shouting matches. His control was subtle, creeping in like a slow-growing vine until I was completely entangled. It was in the way he'd correct my words in front of his friends, the way he'd subtly place his hand on my lower back at parties whenever I laughed a little too loudly. It was in the way he'd insist he was just looking out for me whenever I wanted to do something without him. And then one evening it all became undeniably clear. We were supposed to go out to dinner with his colleagues. A fancy high-profile event that he had been talking about for weeks. I spent hours picking the perfect outfit. A stunning deep red dress that hugged my curves in all the right places. I wanted to look beautiful, to feel confident. To remind myself that I was more than just David's wife. The moment I stepped out of the bedroom, his eyes darkened. Go change. His voice was calm, too calm. A quiet command, not a request. I frowned. Why? His lips pressed into a thin line. That dress is too revealing. It's not appropriate for this kind of dinner. I glanced down at myself. The dress wasn't revealing at all. It was elegant, sophisticated. But I knew that tone, the warning in his gaze. I had two choices. I could argue or I could comply. And for the first time in years I found myself questioning. I had changed for him so many times before. Changed my outfit. Changed my words. Changed my dreams. Changed myself. But that night was different. Because standing there in that red dress, I finally saw it. The prison he had built around me disguised as love. And I made a decision. I wouldn't change my dress. I would change him. I walked closer, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. David, I said softly, watching his gaze flicker with suspicion. What? He muttered, crossing his arms. I smiled. A slow, knowing smile. You don't own me. His entire body went still. What did you just say? My heart pounded, but I lifted my chin. You don't own me, David. And I'm done pretending you do. For the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me, no. Fear of losing control. His jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Emma, don't start this. Just go change. But I didn't move. I didn't cave. And that night, for the first time in our marriage, David realized his power over me was slipping. And he hated it. The night didn't end in screaming or slamming doors. It ended in something much quieter. David stormed out alone, muttering something about me making a scene. Me. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, at the woman I had been too afraid to see for so long. I looked beautiful. And for the first time in years I felt it too. But I also knew something else. This was just the beginning. Because I wasn't just going to change my dress. I was going to change my entire life. That night, after David stormed out, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I traced my reflection with my eyes, studying the way the deep red dress fit against my skin. For so long I had dressed for him, spoken for him, lived for him. But tonight he left without me. And for the first time in years I felt free. I walked over to the closet and pulled out a small box. Inside, tucked away beneath old scarves and forgotten trinkets, was a set of earrings I hadn't worn in years. David hated them. Too flashy, he had said. Too much. So I had stopped wearing them. Like I had stopped wearing so many things. Like I had stopped being me. I put them on. The moment the cold metal touched my skin, it felt like I had unlocked a part of myself I had buried. A part that had been waiting for me to wake up. And then, as if fate itself had been watching, my phone buzzed. A text message. Not from David. From Claire. My best friend. The one David had spent years pushing away from me. Hey, are you okay? I saw that David went to the gala alone. I wanted to check in. I stared at the screen, my heart clenching. Claire. The woman who had been there long before David had come into my life. The woman who had seen every red flag before I had the courage to admit they were real. I had let him drive her away. And now she was still here. Still reaching out. Still waiting for me to choose myself. I didn't hesitate. I'm okay. But, do you want to grab a drink? The reply came instantly. Yes. Where and when? I smiled to myself. David thought I would stay home waiting for him. Waiting to apologize. Waiting to become small again. But tonight I was done waiting. I arrived at the bar a little after 9. The air was alive, filled with laughter and music. And there at the corner booth was Claire. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Her gaze flickered over my dress, my earrings, the way I carried myself. "You look different," she said, tilting her head. I took a deep breath and smiled. "I feel different." We talked for hours. About life. About who I used to be. About the version of me I had lost to David's control. I told her everything. The gaslighting. The way he had slowly chipped away at me piece by piece. How tonight had been my breaking point. And Claire? She didn't say "I told you so." He just listened. And then she held my hand and squeezed it. "You're finally waking up, Em." Halfway through the night I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness. Like the invisible chains David had wrapped around me were starting to crack. Like I was standing on the edge of something new. Something powerful. But I also knew one thing. David wasn't going to let me go that easily. I came home late. The apartment was quiet. The air felt tense. Like a storm had just passed through. And then I saw it. A single note sitting on the counter. A message from David. "We need to talk." I exhaled slowly. I knew what this meant. This wasn't about talking. This was about control. He wasn't going to ask me what happened tonight. He was going to tell me how I should feel. How I was wrong for standing up to him. How he was just protecting me. How I should be grateful for his love. I could already hear the script forming in his head. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I picked up the note and tore it in half. Then I turned off my phone, kicked off my heels and went to bed. Because for the first time in a long time, I was choosing me. David could wait. But I was done waiting for him. What I didn't know was that this was just the beginning of the war between us. Because when David saw that he was losing control of me, he would become more dangerous than ever. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no guilt. No fear. Just a strange, unfamiliar sense of freedom. Like I had taken the first real breath in years. But that peace, it didn't last long. Because when I walked into the kitchen I found David waiting for me. He was standing by the counter, arms crossed, eyes dark and unreadable. The moment I saw him my body reacted before my mind did. I stiffened. My pulse quickened. Because even without a single word I could feel it. Something was different. "You ignored my note." His voice was calm. Too calm. Like a predator watching its prey. I reached for a coffee mug, keeping my hands steady. I was tired. His jaw clenched. "Where were you last night?" I blinked. Not because I was caught off guard. But because for the first time I realized just how deep his control ran. He expected me to answer. To explain myself. To justify where I had been. As if I needed his permission to exist. I set the mug down and turned to him, tilting my head. "Why does it matter?" His entire body tensed. I had never questioned him before. Never challenged him. But now. I watched the moment he realized I wasn't the same woman anymore. "You were with her, weren't you?" His voice was sharp now. My lips curled into a smirk. "Her." His eyes flashed. "Claire." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because my silence was louder than words. David let out a cold laugh, shaking his head. "She's filling your head with nonsense, isn't she?" I didn't blink. "You mean the truth?" His expression hardened. "Emma, be careful," he murmured, stepping closer. A warning. A threat. A last-ditch effort to scare me back into submission. But he didn't scare me anymore. I had already seen who he really was. And the thing about men like David, they don't handle losing control well. He expected me to cower. To apologize. To back down. But instead, I let out a slow breath. And said the words that sealed my fate. I want a divorce. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that filled the space between us. His face remained still, but his fingers twitched at his sides. I had blindsided him. Because in his mind I would never leave. I would bend. I would break. But I wouldn't walk away. His voice was low, almost mocking. "You don't mean that." I tilted my head. "Oh, but I do." He took a step forward. I didn't move. His breath was sharp. "You're making a mistake." I laughed. "No, David. Marrying you was the mistake." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Then in an instant his entire demeanor changed. The anger vanished. His lips curled into a soft smile. The same charming smile he had used on me all those years ago. The same one that had once made me weak. He reached for my hands, holding them gently. Like we weren't standing on the edge of a war. "Emma," he whispered. "I love you." I stared at him, at the master manipulator in front of me. And I felt nothing. "I used to believe that," I murmured. "But love isn't control, David." His fingers tightened around mine. Just for a second. Just enough for me to feel the restraint. Then just as quickly he let go. His smile never wavered. But his eyes burned. "You're upset," he said smoothly. His voice was gentle, persuasive. "You're thinking irrationally." I raised an eyebrow. "Because I finally stood up for myself?" His jaw tightened. "You're just confused, Emma." I smiled. "No, David. I'm finally thinking clearly." He exhaled sharply. Then for the first time since our marriage began, he looked nervous. Because I wasn't backing down. Because he was losing me. And he couldn't handle it. "Fine," he said after a moment, his tone eerily calm. "If this is what you want, I won't stop you." I blinked. That was easier than I expected. Too easy. Something felt off. Then he leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "But Emma." A chill ran down my spine. His hand brushed my cheek, a touch so light it could almost be mistaken for affection. Almost. "You'll regret this." And just like that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, my skin burning from his final warning. Because I had seen it in his eyes. He wasn't going to let me go. Not really. Because men like David don't just let go. They destroy what they can't control. And I had just declared war. The day after I told David I wanted a divorce, something in the air shifted. It wasn't just tension. It wasn't just anger simmering beneath the surface. It was the feeling of being watched. Of waiting for the storm to hit. As I knew him. Men like David, they don't let go. They fight to maintain control. Even when there's nothing left to hold on to. First it was subtle. Small, quiet attempts to make me doubt myself. The way he suddenly became affectionate after months of coldness. The way he started leaving notes on the counter that read, "I still love you. We can fix this. Please don't throw this away." And if I hadn't already seen the truth, maybe, just maybe, I would have fallen for it. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Then the shift became more aggressive. Suddenly I was forgetting things. Documents I swore I left on my desk? Gone. Emails from my lawyer? Mysteriously deleted. David, with his ever-present smirk, tilting his head and saying, "Are you sure you didn't misplace them?" Gaslighting me. Trying to make me think I was the unstable one. And then he started using fear. Not through violence. Oh no, David was too smart for that. Instead it was whispers in the dark. Late-night phone calls where no one spoke on the other end. Footsteps behind me when I walked alone. A shadow that disappeared the moment I turned around. It was psychological warfare. A game of power and control. One night I came home to find my closet in disarray. Clothes ripped from their hangers, shoes tossed to the floor. And there on my dresser was my wedding ring. Placed neatly. Like a message. Like a warning. I refused to give him the reaction he wanted. So I called Claire. She answered on the first ring. "Emma?" Her voice was already laced with concern. I exhaled sharply. "I need to get out." And just like that she showed up at my door. Because unlike David, Claire didn't make me beg for help. I packed a bag that night. Left our home, my cage. Moved into Claire's spare bedroom. And for a moment I felt safe. For a moment I thought maybe this was over. But I should have known better. Because David wasn't done with me. Not yet. 2 days later I walked into work to find whispers. People staring. Avoiding eye contact. And then my boss called me into his office. I sat down trying to keep my hands steady. "What's going on?" I asked. My boss sighed, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were screenshots of emails. From me. Emails I had never sent. Emails that made it look like I was bad-mouthing clients. Leaking company secrets. Sabotaging my own career. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was David. His revenge. His punishment for daring to leave. I fought it, of course. I provided proof, went to IT, demanded they track the emails back. And eventually they did. But by then, the damage was done. The whispers never stopped. And my reputation, the one thing I had built for myself separate from David, was tainted. He had tried to ruin me. And if I didn't do something, he would succeed. That night I sat in Claire's apartment, staring at my reflection. At the woman I had become. The woman David had underestimated. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to fight back. Not just for my career. Not just for my freedom. But for the woman I was before David stole my confidence. For the woman I was meant to be. So I made a decision. I was going to end this. Once and for all. Because David had started a war. And he had no idea just how ready I was to win it. David thought he had won. He thought that by smearing my name, by playing his mind games, he would push me back into his arms. Back into my place. Back under his control. But what he didn't know was that I had already decided. I wasn't the same woman anymore. The night I decided to fight back, I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I sat with Claire at her kitchen table, a notepad in front of me, a laptop open to every financial and legal document I could find. I was done playing his game. It was time to flip the board. Are you sure you want to do this? Claire asked, concern in her eyes. I met her gaze, my voice steady. I don't have a choice. If I don't stop him now, he'll never stop. Claire nodded, tightening her grip around her coffee mug. All right, she said. Let's take this bastard down. I started with gathering evidence. For years, I had ignored the signs of his financial manipulation. The way he would make me sign documents without reading them. The way our shared accounts had always seemed to favor him more than me. I went through bank statements, business dealings, hidden transactions. And there was a paper trail of control. Money transferred to an unknown account. Private purchases on luxury vacations I had never taken. A hidden financial web designed to trap me. And then came the real proof. The hidden contracts in his name. The business expenses that didn't add up. And most importantly, the recordings. Because if David had taught me anything, it was how to expect manipulation. And I had been recording our conversations for weeks. Every threat, every lie, every moment of gaslighting, all saved. Waiting for me to use them. Then I hired a lawyer. A damn good one. Not just for divorce. For everything. To expose him. To strip him of the power he thought he had over me. To show the world exactly who he was. And the best part? He never even saw it coming. The first blow came in the form of a legal notice. Delivered straight to his office. The moment he opened it, I imagine his world tilted. Because suddenly I wasn't just asking for a divorce. I was suing him. For financial fraud. For emotional abuse. For every single lie and manipulation he had ever inflicted on me. His reaction was instant. That same day I got a text message. David, Emma. What the hell is this? I didn't reply. Because for the first time, I wasn't playing defense. I was on the attack. The second blow came when the company we both once worked for received an anonymous email. One with detailed evidence of his financial mismanagement. One that exposed his shady dealings behind the scenes. One that forced them to investigate him. His career, the thing he prized more than anything, was now on the line. The third and final blow came at the divorce hearing. David walked in calm, confident. Because he thought this was just another manipulation game. That he could charm his way out of this. That I would crumble like I always did. But when my lawyer slid the stack of evidence across the table, his face changed. And in that moment, he knew. He had already lost. I didn't smile when the judge ruled in my favor. When David was ordered to pay damages. When his assets were frozen, pending an investigation. I just sat there watching. Watching him realize that for the first time in his life, he had no power over me. He tried to talk to me after the ruling. Tried to beg, to plead, to twist reality back into his favor. But I just walked past him. Because David had finally become what he had always feared the most. Irrelevant. That night, Claire and I opened a bottle of wine and sat on her balcony. The city lights glowed in the distance, and for the first time in years, I felt light. I had won. Not just the case. Not just my freedom. But myself. And that was worth everything. David had tried to ruin me. Tried to own me. Tried to control me. But in the end, I changed my dress. And I changed my life. The morning after my final victory, I woke up in Claire's guest room feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. There was no tension in my shoulders. No anxiety curling in my stomach. No silent dread over what mood David would wake up in. For the first time in forever I was free. And that freedom, it tasted sweet. But rebuilding a life after escaping a toxic marriage wasn't easy. I had spent so many years wrapped in David's control that I had forgotten who I was, what I liked, what I wanted. So that became my mission. Not just to survive without him, but to thrive. Step 1. Getting my own place. I refused to let David own a single part of my life anymore. So I found a small but beautiful apartment in a quiet part of the city. It wasn't as big as our old house. It wasn't as luxurious. But it was mine. And that made it perfect. Step 2. Fixing my career. David had tried to sabotage me, but he underestimated one thing. My resilience. With Claire's help, I started rebuilding my reputation. One project at a time. One client at a time. And slowly but surely, people started seeing me again. Not as David's ex-wife. Not as the woman he broke. But as someone who was stronger than ever. Step 3. Relearning happiness. It started with small things. Wearing red lipstick again. Buying that dress I knew David would have hated. Dancing in my apartment without fear of judgment. And then came something I didn't expect. Something that changed everything. Love. I didn't go looking for it. I didn't even think I was ready for it. But Nick. Nick walked into my life like he had always been meant to be there. We met at a networking event. A last-minute thing Claire dragged me to. I had planned to stay for 10 minutes tops. But then I met him. Nick was different. Where David had been sharp edges, Nick was soft confidence. Where David had been calculating, Nick was genuine. And when he looked at me, it wasn't with control or possession. It was with something else entirely. Respect. We started as friends. He never pushed. Never rushed. And maybe that's why one evening, as we sat by the water sipping wine, I found myself falling. Not into infatuation. Not into fear disguised as love. But into something real. Something safe. Something that felt like home. One night as we walked back from dinner, he turned to me and asked, "Can I take you on a real date?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to say yes. But because for the first time in my life, I wanted to say yes for me. Not for anyone else. So I looked up at him, smiling softly, and whispered, "Yes." David had taken so much from me. My confidence. My freedom. My sense of self. But he hadn't destroyed me. No. Now I was rebuilding. Now I was flourishing. Now I was finally happy. David, he was nothing but a closed chapter in my story. In my new story, it was just getting started. There's a moment when a man like David finally realizes he's lost control. Not when you say you're leaving. Not when you win the divorce. Not even when you rebuild your life without him. No. It's when he sees you happy. Truly, genuinely, unshakably happy without him. That's when the reality hits. And for David, that moment came on a night I never saw coming. It had been months since I last saw him. I thought he had moved on. Or at least I had hoped he did. But men like David, they never really move on. They just wait. Wait for a crack in your strength. Wait for a moment when you're weak enough to pull back in. But the thing was, I wasn't weak anymore. It was a charity gala. The kind of event I would have dreaded attending with David. But tonight, I wasn't with him. I was with Nick. And for the first time I felt at ease in a room like this. There were no whispered criticisms in my ear. No demands to smile wider, act softer, play the role of his perfect wife. I was just me, laughing, smiling, enjoying a life that was finally mine. And then, I felt it. That unmistakable presence behind me. A shadow from a past I had no intention of reliving. David turned, and there he was. Standing near the bar, holding a drink he hadn't touched. Watching me. His eyes sharp, his posture stiff. As if the sight of me standing next to another man was something he never truly considered real. Nick followed my gaze. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. Instead of reacting, he just did something small but powerful. He slid his hand to the small of my back. A simple touch. A grounding one. A reminder of where I belonged now. With someone who saw me. Not as a possession. But as a partner. David's expression darkened. He set down his glass and made his way toward me. Every step dripping with the confidence he used to wield over me like a weapon. But tonight, it held no power. Because I was no longer the woman he had spent years breaking down. Emma. He greeted smoothly, flashing that same smirk that had once made me weak. David, I said evenly, my expression unreadable. His gaze flickered to Nick, then back to me. You look different, he noted. The way he said it made it clear. He hated it. He hated that I was glowing, that I was thriving, that I had become everything he tried to keep me from being. Nick reached out his hand. Nick Anderson, he introduced himself, his tone firm, his grip strong. David barely acknowledged it. Instead, he turned his attention back to me. So we're pretending we're strangers now? He asked, forcing a laugh. I tilted my head. We are strangers, David. His smirk faltered. For a brief second I saw it. The moment he truly realized. He had lost. Not just me, but every ounce of control he ever had over me. And that destroyed him. He cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. You never answered my texts, he said, a hint of frustration leaking through. Because I had nothing left to say, I replied simply. His jaw tightened. You really think this guy, he gestured to Nick, is different? I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because David still thought this was about someone else. As if my happiness was something that only existed in relation to a man. But he didn't understand. Nick wasn't the reason I was happy. I was happy because I had finally chosen myself. Goodbye, David, I said softly. And then, I turned away. Not because I was running. Not because I was avoiding confrontation. But because he simply didn't matter anymore. I felt Nick's hand squeeze mine gently as we walked away. Not possessive. Not controlling. Just there. A quiet, steady presence. A reminder that I had finally found something real. And David was nothing but a chapter one had already closed. That night I stood on my balcony staring out at the city. I breathed in deeply. The air felt lighter. As if, for the first time, I was no longer carrying the weight of a love that was never really love at all. And that's when I knew. I had truly, completely, and irrevocably moved on. David had spent so many years trying to make me small. Trying to keep me trapped in his version of love. But in the end, he was the one left behind. And I was finally free. After that night I thought David was done. I thought he had finally accepted defeat. That he would move on. Find another woman to control, to manipulate, to break. But men like David, they don't just walk away. Not when they've spent years molding you into something they could own. Not when their ego is shattered. Not when they realize that their greatest possession, me, was gone forever. And so his destruction began. Not mine. His own. First it was subtle. Rumors started floating around his social circle. About his marriage failing. About his business declining. About how his ex-wife had left him for someone better. And David was spiraling. His carefully curated image, the powerful, charming, successful man, was falling apart. Then came the real blow. The company scandal. A whistleblower exposed some questionable financial dealings inside the firm. Contracts that weren't ethical. Money being misallocated. And David was right at the center of it. The company suspended him immediately. The investigation began. And suddenly, the man who once controlled everything couldn't even control his own future. Claire called me the day the news broke. Have you seen it? Her voice was breathless with excitement. I blinked at my laptop screen. There was a headline. A picture of David looking furious, cornered by reporters. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Nodded. I saw it. Claire laughed. Oh my God. It's finally happening. And for a moment, I felt nothing. No rage. No vindication. Just peace. Because I didn't need to destroy David. He had done that all by himself. Nick found me later that night sitting on the couch staring at the news. His voice was gentle. Are you okay? I turned to him, and I smiled. I'm perfect. The next day I got a text. David, can we talk? I stared at my phone. At his name. At the last remaining string tying me to my past. Then slowly I pressed delete. No response. No second thought. Just a clean, final erasure of him from my life. David had spent years trying to break me. To tear me down. To make me small. But in the end, he was the one who ended up alone, powerless, and forgotten. Me. I was happier than I had ever been. I thought David was gone for good. I thought his downfall was the last chapter in our story. That he had finally let me go, finally accepted that his control over me had ended. I was wrong. Because men like David, they don't give up. Not until they've tried everything. And his final act wasn't one of anger. It was one of desperation. It started with a text. Then another. Then another. At first they were simple. David, Emma, I just want to talk. David, can we meet? Just for coffee. David, I need to see you. I ignored them all. But ignoring David only made him try harder. One night I was walking home from work when I saw him. Standing outside my apartment building. Waiting. The moment our eyes met, my breath caught. Not out of fear. Not out of pain. But out of disbelief. As for the first time David looked broken. His sharp suit was slightly wrinkled. His usually perfectly styled hair was messy. And his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were filled with something I never thought I'd see. Regret. Real raw regret. But I knew better. I knew men like David don't regret losing you. They regret losing control. I stopped a few feet away from him, arms crossed. What are you doing here? He let out a shaky breath. I needed to see you. I sighed, shifting my weight. Why? His jaw tightened. And then softly he said, because I miss you. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was insulting. You miss me? I repeated, tilting my head. He nodded, stepping closer. But I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't fall into his trap. Emma, please. Just listen. There was something different in his voice now. Not anger. Not manipulation. But genuine panic. Like he was finally understanding that I was gone. That I wasn't coming back. I know I hurt you. He swallowed hard. I know I was controlling. That I wasn't a good husband. I stayed silent. He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. I don't know what's wrong with me. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting you, but... He stopped. Then his voice dropped. I was protecting myself, wasn't I? For the first time I saw him. Not the powerful, in-control David. Not the manipulator. Just a man who had lost everything. And suddenly, I felt nothing for him. No hatred. No anger. Just pity. I loved you, David, I said softly. His breath hitched. I really truly did. I took a step closer, staring up at him. But I don't love you anymore. His hands fisted at his sides. Emma. But I shook my head. You didn't love me. You loved owning me. And now that I'm free, you don't know who you are without me. His face crumbled. For the first time he looked lost. Like a man who had built his entire existence around control. And now had nothing left to hold on to. And I had never felt lighter. He exhaled sharply. I can change. I smiled. Not cruelly. Not mockingly. Just sadly. I hope you do. Then gently I stepped around him. And walked away. I expected him to follow me. To shout. To demand another chance. But he didn't. Because he finally understood. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a test. This was goodbye. That night I sat on my balcony staring at the city lights. Nick joined me, his warmth solid, safe, real. I leaned into him, feeling his arms wrap around me. For the first time in years I felt completely at peace. Completely whole. And David? David was just a ghost from my past. A lesson I had survived. And one I would never repeat. Because I was finally free. And this time, I wasn't looking back. The night I walked away from David for the last time, I expected to feel relief. Expected the weight of our past to lift from my shoulders. And it did at first. But what I didn't expect was the silence that followed. The way my phone stopped buzzing with his desperate attempts to reach me. The way his presence, his control, his manipulation, his games, just disappeared. I should have been happy. And I was. But deep down a part of me kept wondering. Was it really over? For the first time in years, David wasn't watching my every move. Wasn't pulling strings behind the scenes to keep me tied to him. And that should have been a good thing. But the thing about men like David, they don't just walk away quietly. They don't just let go. So I couldn't help but wonder. What was he planning? Nick noticed my unease. One evening as we sat on his couch, wine glasses in hand, he finally asked, "You're still thinking about him, aren't you?" I hesitated, staring at my drink. "Not because I want him back," I said carefully, "but because I don't trust him to stay gone." Nick exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Do you think he's planning something? I let out a humorless laugh. It's David. Of course he is. And I was right. Because 2 weeks later I got a call from Claire. A call that made my stomach drop. Emma. You need to see this. He sent a link. An article. And there, splashed across the headline, was David's face. Former executive David Lawrence files for bankruptcy after business collapse. I blinked. Read the words again. Then again. Because for a moment I thought it had to be a joke. David? Bankrupt? The man who had always prided himself on power, control, wealth? The man who thought he was untouchable? Had lost everything? I clicked on the article, scanning the details. It was worse than I expected. His business dealings had been exposed. His financial secrets leaked. And with the fraud allegations still looming over him, his company had officially cut all ties. He had nothing left. Claire's voice was breathless with disbelief. I thought you'd want to know. I leaned back against the chair, running a hand through my hair. And then, before I could stop myself, I laughed. Because for the first time I realized David had done this to himself. I never had to ruin him. Never had to seek revenge. Never had to stoop to his level. Because karma had done the work for me. Because in the end, the only thing David ever truly cared about was power. No. He had none. That night I met Nick for dinner. He already knew something had happened the moment he saw me. What is it? He asked, eyes filled with curiosity. I slid my phone across the table. He read the headline. His brows lifted. Then slowly a smirk played on his lips. Well, that's poetic. And it was. Not because I wanted him to suffer. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I had spent years thinking he was invincible. Thinking I could never escape him. No. He was the one who had lost everything. And I was just getting started. That weekend I invited Claire, Nick, and a few friends over to celebrate. Not David's downfall, but my freedom. We drank wine, laughed until our sides hurt, danced in my small but cozy apartment. For the first time in forever I felt like I had control of my life again. And then, just as the night was winding down, there was a knock at the door. I frowned. Claire and Nick exchanged looks. Are you expecting someone? Nick asked. I shook my head. Slowly, cautiously I walked to the door. And the moment I opened it my stomach dropped. Because standing there looking like a ghost of the past was David. His suit was disheveled, his eyes tired, hollow, desperate. And before I could say anything he whispered, Emma, please. The room behind me went silent. Nick was on his feet in an instant. Claire's eyes narrowed. Me. I felt nothing. Not fear. Not pity. Not even anger. Just a deep, overwhelming sense of finality. Because this was it. The moment I would close the door on him forever. David took a shaky breath. I lost everything, Emma. He swallowed hard. I made a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. But I need you. I need you now more than ever. I tilted my head, watching him carefully. Then slowly I exhaled. No, David. You need control. His eyes flickered with panic. That's not true. I loved you. I still do. I sighed, stepping forward. No, David. You don't love me. You love the idea of me. And you hate that I don't belong to you anymore. His lips parted. Emma, please. But I was done. Done listening. Done giving him space in my life. Nick stepped beside me, his presence solid, unshakable. I turned to him, giving him a soft, knowing smile. Then with one final breath I met David's gaze. And I shut the door. Not with anger. Not with spite. Just with peace. Because this was closure. In my life. It was finally mine. David had lost everything. His money. His career. His reputation. But most importantly, he had lost me. And that was something he would never get back. After I shut the door in David's face, I expected him to leave. To finally understand that there was nothing left between us. That whatever power he once held over me was gone. But David had never been the type to accept defeat. And that night, as I stood in the warmth of my home, surrounded by people who actually cared about me, I realized that even with nothing left, he still thought he had a chance. And that was his greatest mistake. For the next few days I barely thought about him. Life was moving forward and I refused to let my past slow me down. I had a new apartment, a stable career, and a man who actually loved me for who I was. I was happy. But David David was desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. It started with messages. Not just texts, emails, voicemails, even handwritten letters left at my building. They all said the same thing. That he missed me. That he had made a mistake. That he was sorry. That he still loved me. And at first I just ignored them. Because his words meant nothing now. But then his messages turned into something else. One morning I stepped outside and found a bouquet of flowers at my doorstep. Red roses. The kind he used to buy me when he was apologizing for something. There was a note. Emma, I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong. But please just give me one more chance. I stared at it, my hands tightening into fists. I didn't feel flattered. I felt angry. Because he still thought he could fix this. That a few flowers and empty words could erase everything he did. Nick found me staring at the bouquet when he arrived. He took one look at my face, then at the roses and sighed. David, he asked, already knowing the answer. I nodded, jaw tight. Nick didn't say anything at first. He just reached out, took the bouquet, and threw it in the trash. Then he turned to me, voice gentle. Are you okay? And that was the difference between him and David. David never asked. He just demanded. But Nick, he always gave me a choice. And I loved him for it. That night I sent David one final message. Stop. If you keep contacting me, I will file a restraining order. I thought that would be the end of it. That he would finally let go. I was wrong. Because the next day he didn't send another message. He showed up. It was late. I had just finished work and was walking home when I felt it. That eerie, unshakable feeling of being watched. I turned the corner onto my street. And there he was. Standing near my building. Waiting. Just like he had the last time. I froze for half a second. Not out of fear. But out of annoyance. Because this was pathetic. He had lost everything, his job, his reputation, his power. And instead of rebuilding himself, he was still trying to reclaim what he had lost in me. And I wasn't having it. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and walked straight toward him. His face lit up the second he saw me. Like he actually thought I had come to him willingly. Emma. Finally I. Stop, David. He blinked. I wanted to talk. There is nothing left to talk about. He exhaled, looking down at the ground. I lost everything, Emma. His voice was strained, almost desperate. I don't have my job. I don't have my money. And I don't have you. I just stared at him. Waiting. Because I could feel it. The moment he was leading up to. And then it came. His final, desperate attempt. We can fix this. We can start over. I tilted my head. David, what exactly do you think is going to happen here? He swallowed hard. We loved each other once. We can again. I know I made mistakes, but I can change. You just have to give me. I laughed. Because it was honestly, truly ridiculous. And that made something snap in him. His hands clenched into fists. His face twisted with frustration. So that's it? You've just replaced me? I narrowed my eyes. I didn't replace you. I moved on. He scoffed. With him. Nick. He meant Nick. I shrugged. With someone who actually treats me with respect? Yes. For a moment he just stood there. His body stiff, tense, trembling with barely contained emotion. And then finally, he let out a long, shaky breath. And something in his expression shifted. Something in his eyes dimmed. Because he finally, truly understood. That this wasn't just a phase. This wasn't just a rebellion. This was final. Goodbye, David. I turned. Walked away. And this time, he didn't follow me. Because for the first time he knew. He had no place in my life anymore. And I was finally free. That night I curled into Nick's arms, feeling his warmth. I closed my eyes and let out a deep, slow breath. David was gone. Not just physically. But from my heart. From my mind. From my soul. And for the first time in forever. My life was truly my own. For the first time in years I woke up with a sense of absolute peace. No lingering doubts. No buried pain. No ghost of David's voice whispering in the back of my mind. Just quiet. Just freedom. And when I looked over at Nick, still fast asleep beside me, his breathing soft and even, I knew. This was my future. A future David would never be part of again. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. And slowly the scars David left behind began to fade. I didn't flinch at the sound of my phone ringing anymore. I didn't hesitate before saying exactly what I wanted. I didn't feel like I had to shrink myself to keep a man happy. As Nick never asked me to be anything other than myself. One morning as we sat on the balcony drinking coffee, he turned to me with that soft, knowing smile. "So, you're happy?" I raised a brow. "That's a stupid question." He chuckled. "Indulge me." I took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest. Then I nodded. "Yeah. I'm happy." And I meant it. Not long after that, David left the city. Packed up what little he had left and disappeared. Some said he was trying to start over somewhere new. Others said he was chasing after another woman, trying to regain some sense of control. But me, I didn't care. Because for the first time in my life, David was just a name from my past. Not a wound. Not a shadow. Just a memory. I never saw him again. Not in passing. Not at events. Not even in old social circles. It was as if the universe had finally done what I had been trying to do for years. Erase him from my life completely. And it felt amazing. Years later, I found myself walking down the aisle. Not toward a man who wanted to control me. Not toward a life I felt trapped in. But toward Nick. Toward love that didn't demand my silence. That didn't require me to bend, to break, to be less than who I was. Toward a future that was built on respect, trust, and real, unconditional love. And as I reached him, his fingers intertwining with mine, I felt something deep in my chest. Something light. Something whole. Something that whispered, "This is how love is supposed to feel." David had always thought I would crawl back. That I would be nothing without him. That I would realize I had made a mistake by leaving. But standing there beside the man who had truly shown me what love was, I knew I was never the mistake. David was. Now I had a life that was truly, completely, beautifully mine. And there wasn't a single part of it that I would ever let David ruin again.